From the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City, welcome to the 2022 U.S. Senatorial Primary Debate hosted by the State Chamber Research Foundation. I'm Alex Cameron with Griffin Communications, News 9, News on 6. I will be moderating today's debate. Invitations to participate in today's debate were extended to the 5 candidates who polled highest in a survey recently conducted by Sooner Poll. This criterion was determined before the poll was commissioned, and you can view the results of the poll on the News 9 and News on 6 websites. Now, 4 of those 5 candidates are with us today. Due to Congress being in session, Markwayne Mullin was unable to attend, but did send a statement. I will read a part of that right now. While I wish I was able to be there in person to debate the important issues facing our great nation, my congressional duties have me in Washington, D.C. this week. Unfortunately, the congressional schedule and the chamber's schedule were both set many months ago, and there was nothing we could do. The people of Oklahoma elected me to defend our American values and our Oklahoma way of life. I take my job representing the people of Oklahoma very seriously, and that job is more important than ever as Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer are trying to destroy the very foundation of our country. There are scheduled votes today in Congress, and I do not miss votes except for rare family emergencies. As a successful business owner, I am so appreciative of all that you do to create jobs and run successful businesses here in Oklahoma. You are the fuel that powers the American economy. Thank you for the opportunity to address you through this letter. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. That's from Markwayne Mullin. Now, the foundation designed the format of this 60-minute debate, which will give the candidates 1 minute each per answer and 30 seconds for any rebuttals if they choose to make a rebuttal. And candidates, I would just ask you, if you do want to make a rebuttal, just wait until everyone's answered the question, raise your hand, and I'll recognize you for 30 seconds, and then everyone else will get a chance to rebut as well. I am, by the way, the timer here for this, so I will be trying to keep track, and I'll do my best to let you finish out, but let's all try to keep answers to 1 minute and rebuttals to 30 seconds. The candidates will also have 2 minutes for closing statements at the conclusion of the debate. Now, with the help of the foundation, I decided on the topics and the questions. None of the questions have been shared with the candidates. So that we can focus on the content of the candidates' answers, I ask the audience to do your best to remain silent and abstain from cheering or booing throughout the debate. The order, not that you would do that. Make it more fun. The order for responses is alphabetical by last name, which is also how the candidates are arranged on the stage, and will rotate who goes first with each question. So, we'll begin with the first question, and this question has to do with inflation. Inflation is at a 40-year high. Americans are paying the highest gas prices ever. What is the solution? Aside from criticizing the Biden administration or blocking Democratic legislation, what measures would you propose? And if you're in the majority, that is, if the Senate were to flip, what measures would you propose that you honestly believe could overcome a likely Democratic filibuster? And we'll begin with you, Senator Dom.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always great to be with the State Chamber. I've enjoyed these lunches over the years serving as a state senator. For those of you that know me, know that I have been a fiscal conservative during my entire time. Since I've been in the legislature and even before I got elected. Because of my background, I actually grew up overseas. I lived in Eastern Europe where I saw massive inflation caused by government spending. So if we want to address the root problem of inflation in this country, we have to address the spending. And we're going to have to be honest. Both Republicans and Democrats in Washington, D.C. have been guilty of overspending us. Most of the money they spend is on unconstitutional measures. We cannot continue to borrow from China to send overseas, whether it's to Ukraine or what other cause they feel is best. We have to stop the spending. I've been a fiscal conservative since I've been in the state legislature. Thankfully, we have a balanced budget here at the state level, but even when it hasn't been spent appropriately, I've been willing to vote no, even on Republican budgets, if it was spending in an inappropriate way. So I've proven that I will stand strong against the inflationary policies being done by both parties, but we have to audit and end the Federal Reserve because they were created with the goal of ending inflation, and since they've been created, the U.S. dollar has lost over 95% of its purchasing power. That is a hidden tax affecting every Oklahoman.
Thank you very much. Luke Holland.
So the first thing that we need to do to stop inflation is pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. We have entirely enough revenue in this country from the tax policies that we've already enacted. In fact, when we got the Trump tax cuts done, all the media said that it would create a huge budget deficit, but instead it created a booming economy and it created booming revenue. So we have plenty of revenue in this country. We need to have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution that limits spending. The $6 trillion that's been spent over the last couple of years, largely as a result of the pandemic or in response to it, is the reason why we're seeing this crazy inflation right now. So bringing spending down, balancing the budget is the first thing that we need to do. But beyond that, we need to expand supply in this country. We need to make this country the most competitive country in the world to do business in. That starts with tax policy, but it's also on regulatory policy. We see high gas prices, high diesel prices all across the state because the government is limiting our ability to access oil and gas resources in the Mountain West and the Gulf of Mexico. By reducing the regulatory burdens that businesses face, it makes it easier to expand our ability to have supply, and that lowers prices for everybody.
Thank you. Scott Pruitt.
Well, good afternoon. It's good to be back with you here at the State Chamber. And with respect to the issue of inflation, I think there are three primary reasons contributing to inflation today. One is the fiscal and monetary policy of Congress has already been mentioned. We've had stimulus packages, obviously dating back to 2008, that have injected a substantial amount of liquidity into the marketplace, which has caused, I believe, too much availability of liquidity and caused inflation to rise substantially. But energy costs are also a very large contributing factor to the current inflationary pressures we have. And it's because this administration has taken steps to say no to production in the Gulf, no to production in Alaska. It's canceled pipelines, and it's said no to energy independence for this country. That needs to change, and policies need to change to reduce the cost of energy to our citizens. And then lastly, when you think about energy and inflationary pressure with respect to monetary policy, you also have to look at the supply chain. And our supply chain is more fragmented today. There's not as much capacity as far as storage and shipping capacity. That needs to change. And so supply chain issues, along with energy, along with the printing of money to support debt, all need to change to address inflation.
Thank you. T.W. Shannon.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with the State Chamber. It was an honor to work with you during my time in the legislature when we passed workers' compensation reform, and that was the bill that I authored, and it was, frankly, it happened because of a lot of the people in this room that we work with to get it done. But as it relates directly to our economy and the out-of-control inflation that we see caused by Joe Biden and the regular policies by the left, to address inflation is we need to make the Trump tax cuts permanent. That's the first thing we should do. We should also encourage drilling in this country. We've got every natural resource known to mankind, and we certainly need to pass a balanced budget amendment. We are spending ourselves into oblivion in this country. And the real question that the world is waiting to answer, not just America, but the entire world is this century going to be governed, controlled by America, or is it going to be led by America? We have to have the strongest military the world's ever seen, and we've got to get our fiscal house in order. But if we're going to have a real discussion about how we reduce spending, we've got to have a real honest conversation about entitlement programs in this country, and we've got to restore a work ethic in this country. Many of you, like me, I'm a job creator. It's a challenge finding people with a work ethic these days. If you have a work ethic and you can pass a drug test in America, the world is your oyster right now. So we should encourage, a balanced budget amendment. We should certainly encourage a real solution as it relates to enacting the Trump tax cuts and making them permanent.
Okay, thank you all. Next question is about workforce development. In a recent survey commissioned by the State Chamber and the Business Roundtable, business leaders said the top threat to the future success of their businesses was a shortage of qualified workers. Congress included nearly $1 billion for job training in the bipartisan infrastructure law, and the administration is encouraging businesses to partner with organizations that provide job training. Do you support these initiatives? How else can the federal government help solve this threat to Oklahoma's prosperity? Begin with Luke Holland.
So I was down in Altus just a couple of weeks ago and talking to some small business owners. They may be in the room today. And they said one of the biggest challenges that they have is workforce. But the problem is that they find qualified candidates process, they get a start date, and then they don't show up for work on the first day of the job. And the reason for that is because our welfare programs have just exploded. We're incentivizing people not to work right now. And that's not just bad for business, that's bad for our culture. God created work before the fall. Work is a good thing. We need to incentivize work as much as we possibly can. That's why it's so important for us to have low taxes, because whenever we have high taxes and it taxes the productivity of the people, you're taking away their freedoms. And so we need to look at all these welfare programs that we've got. We need to roll them back and make sure that we're not making it possible for people to actually stay on the dole and not show up to that first day on the job when an employer wants to offer them that kind of opportunity. Workforce development programs here at the state level, those are really important. Our education programs to make sure that we have a workforce that's capable, the people who do want to work. But the biggest challenge we're facing right now is that there's a lot of people out there who just don't want to work, and the government is enabling them to do that, and we need to put an end to that.
Thank you. Scott Pruitt.
So education truly is key to workforce development. And the state of Oklahoma, as you know, has had historically a very strong career tech system. And that is key to making sure that we retrain and also prepare workers for the workplace. And so we need to continue investing both as a state and at the federal level to ensure availability of workers and employees with respect to the jobs that are in the marketplace. But as was mentioned, over the last couple of years, because of the pandemic, the stimulus that was provided as a result of the pandemic, there are many people being incentivized to stay at home. Though there were jobs in the marketplace, those individuals did not take up those opportunities because they were getting paid more to stay at home. That is not the right kind of stimulus, the right type of allocation of resources to address workforce. The right type of allocation is focused on education, both at the state and federal level, and particularly through the career tech system here in Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. Pruitt. T.W. Shannon.
Yeah, there's no question that the best social program in the world is a good paying job. Access to quality education is certainly part of our workforce initiative that we have to have as a country and as a state moving forward, and making sure that everyone has access to quality education. That's why the issues surrounding school choice are so important. But fundamentally, we do have a work ethic problem in this country, and I realized this when I served as Speaker of the House when we passed welfare reform requiring a 20-hour work week for any able-bodied individual who's receiving welfare benefits, and we can do the same thing on a national level. But also something that hasn't been mentioned that I think is important is also our southern border. Right now, we have 2.5 million illegals pouring across our southern border right now, and they're bringing with them Chinese fentanyl, enough Chinese fentanyl to kill every single American 7 times. As I mentioned before, not only do we have a work ethic challenge in this problem, but we have an addiction problem, and it is being fueled by our southern border remaining open. And I used to think that this was just, gross incompetence or negligence by the Biden administration, but I am convinced now that this is a deliberate attempt to undermine this republic. We have the solutions on the conservative side, and that involves a work ethic and requiring people to work who receive government benefits. That's how we start to change the culture as it relates to work ethic in this country.
Thank you. Nathan Down.
Well, constitutionally, the federal government has no authority to be directly involved in workforce development. That's not a role and responsibility of the federal government. That's one of the powers that was reserved to the states or the people. So if we want to talk about it, it would have to be at the local level, whether that's at the state level, with the communities, or with the individual businesses, because they know what's best. So we need to get the federal government out of those affairs. We need to deregulate, because they put so many regulations and stipulations on businesses that it makes hard for them to be able to recruit and hire new workers. Where the federal government could potentially be involved is on the immigration side of things, not just addressing the illegal immigration issue, but on the legal immigration side. We still have a lottery whereby we randomly select people across the world to come into this country. We need to be very deliberate with an entirely new immigration reform package that we are bringing in the type of workers that we need, whether that's people in ag industry, doctors, engineers, whatever we might need. We need to be bringing in people that we actually need in this country, that want to be a part of this country and will fill those needs, but not just randomly selecting people. And if we want to be totally honest about it, if we're talking about workforce development, we should stop aborting future generations when we have 50 to 60 million people that could be in the workforce right now, that their lives were terminated because of abortion, and the federal government has a responsibility to protect life. That's one thing that we can do so we have future generations of quality workers in this country.
Thank you very much. Our next question is on gun safety. Recent mass shootings have again spurred a national debate on guns. Americans want these tragedies to end, but they'd rather not have to see their schools, hospitals, and workplaces turned into fortresses, and certainly Oklahomans don't want their Second Amendment right to be taken away. What is a solution that makes sense for all Americans? Scott Pruitt.
Well, first and foremost, any time that an event like what happened in Uvalde occurs, the immediate focus is on the weapon. And we don't look at the entire situation from the shooter, the weapon, and the environment. There needs to be steps taken in this country to secure and harden schools and hospitals and others that are facing the threats of potential violence. We also need to make sure that we are doing all that we can to prevent mental health related contributions to violent crime, but we shouldn't have just this reflexive action of banning weapons. We had an assault weapons ban in the 1990s. There was not an appreciable difference with respect to violence. Some of the most violent cities in this country have some of the most strict gun laws. So the answer is not always, let's restrict or impede the Second Amendment. In fact, I believe the opposite is true. The culture that we live in devalues life. And we have caustic cynicism in the marketplace, divisiveness that's driving many of these events, and we need to make sure that we deal with those issues in a broad way as opposed to just simply looking at the guns and the Second Amendment and restricting that.
Thank you. T.W. Shannon.
Yeah, there's no question that the tragedies that we see happening in our country are affecting us all, and our hearts certainly bleed for those that have lost life as a result of the violence that is sweeping our nation. And the truth is, we're much too violent of a society, and we've seen an uptick in violence since Joe Biden has taken office, and since there was a cry to defund the police and abolish the police force. We've seen that there's a real woke agenda out there who says, and it's really an anti-police agenda and it's an anti-gun agenda. And the truth is, we should not bend one iota on our Second Amendment rights. The Constitution is pretty clear when it says shall not be infringed upon. That's exactly what it means. And if we're going to have a real discussion about, crime in this country, we have to talk about the southern border, but we also have to have a conversation about the heart. I mean, the truth is, people are too violent. Guns aren't violent. The idea of banning assault rifles have been around a long time. They've been around over 60 years for sure, the kind that are being discussed today. And we've only seen this uptick in violence here recently. We need to have a real discussion in our society about how we reduce violence, how we become a society who's more nurturing and more caring. But that doesn't start with disarming our citizens, because the truth is the people who really cheer and get excited about gun control are criminals, because they know they're going to be citizens who maintain their weapons.
Thank you. Nathan Dom.
Well, I'm honored to be the highest ranked candidate by the NRA in this race. They don't do endorsements but in open seats, but I am the highest ranked by them. I have been endorsed by the Oklahoma Second Amendment Association and the National Association of Gun Rights, because I have not only fought to protect our Second Amendment rights here in Oklahoma, I'm the only candidate that has actually expanded and returned those rights back to the people. So I stand on my record for protecting gun rights. Specifically to what we can do to address this situation, if you look at these mass shootings that have taken place, over 95% of them have taken place in gun-free zones since we created this gun-free zone concept. Criminals will not follow a sign on a door that says that no guns are allowed here. Only law-abiding citizens will follow that sign. Criminals will look at that and say that is a perfect opportunity where no one can fight back. I actually legislation here at the state level that would have allowed discharged veterans to serve as armed security personnel, armed resource officers at our schools to protect our students. But this is another example where the federal government created this problem by getting involved in creating gun-free zones. The government is the one that said you can no longer have insane asylums. Certain people that need permanent inpatient mental health care, but the federal government says we cannot offer them those services. Basically, we have to wait till they commit a crime, and then we have to put them in prison with the rest of the population. This needs to be addressed and fixed at the federal level so we can handle it at the state level.
Thank you. Luke Holland.
So these shootings that have happened are absolute tragedies. My best friend is actually from Uvalde. I've been down there, and so between that and living in Tulsa, these most recent ones have hit a lot closer to home. And I think that the key thing that we need to be focused on is looking at shoring up and hardening these soft targets that we have, whether it's at schools or hospitals. And at schools in particular, our kids should not feel anything but safe when they go to school. And so if that means that we need to have armed police officers at school, if we need to make sure that there's abilities and resources to harden the schools, we need to do all of those things. But the last thing that we should be doing is making it harder for law-abiding citizens to have weapons and to keep and bear arms. It's a constitutional amendment, and it's a constitutional right that people have. And the only way that should be taken away is through due process. A lot of people don't realize that the case of Uvalde, with that guy who was crazy and was already online before the event took place, threatening to hurt people, he had already committed a felony. And had he been turned into the cops, he could have been prosecuted. And he could have been arrested, convicted of a felony, and his guns would have been taken away. And so in a lot of cases, we just need to make sure that the police know that we've got their back, that we're reporting these kinds of situations. We also need to invite the Lord back into the middle of things, because you look at this crazy society that we're living in today with a rise in depression, a rise in crime, and a lot of it comes because the left has been so good at kicking God out of absolutely everything. And we need to reverse that trend.
Thank you. I just want to follow up quickly on that question. In 2008's Heller decision, that's the decision that overturned the ban on firearms in Washington, D.C., Justice Antonin Scalia, writing for the majority, said, like most rights, the right secured by the Second Amendment is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose. So do you agree that there can be some limitations placed on the firearms that Americans can own? T.W. Shannon.
Well, what I agree on is that our Second Amendment is not given to us by the government. It's not given to us even by the Constitution. It's guaranteed by the Constitution. Those rights are inalienable, and they're given to us by God. And certainly, we can have a discussion about weapons in this country. But again, I've heard no proposal, anything, particularly what we've seen signed in Congress here just this week in the last 48 hours. What I've seen is a legislation model that would do absolutely nothing to prevent any of the gun violence that we've seen in this country. So I certainly think that we have an opportunity in this country to talk about what makes America great again, but that starts with a conversation about how we keep people safe. Governments are created for the protection of people, and that's what government should be doing. And certainly I have a right as a father, my wife is here, my son is here, I have a right to protect my family, and the last thing I need is people in Washington, D.C. trying to limit that right.
Nathan Dom?
Governments are created to protect the rights of the people. That's what the Declaration says, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted. That is the purpose, is to protect rights. But sometimes some people will use those rights to violate somebody else's rights. We don't let prisoners continue to keep firearms in the prison because they have violated someone else's rights, they have been locked up, and so they have lost that right when they have committed those crimes against another person. But what we don't do in this country is we don't have pre-crime where we say, hey, we think you might be violating the First Amendment. We think you might, in the future, intend to violate the Second Amendment. We think you might violate somebody else's rights in some other way, so we're going to preemptively go ahead and arrest you. That's what these red flag laws that are being passed across the country are doing. They are a violation of almost every provision in the Bill of Rights, not just the Second Amendment, and that's why I preemptively 2 years ago went ahead and created the nation's first ever anti-red flag law to say, no, here in Oklahoma, we respect the Bill of Rights, we protect people's due process, we protect their free speech, we protect the Second Amendment. I passed that, it was the first in the nation, and that's another example of why I'm running on my proven record of standing up for the rights of the people.
I think the restrictions that have already been placed are probably go too far. We don't need to be looking to impose more limitations on law-abiding citizens because the Constitution is what is designed to actually protect the rights of the people. And unless somebody has committed a felony, which already they're not allowed to own a weapon in that case, and they've had due process to protect themselves from an overarching government, then the restrictions that we need in place, they're already there. We don't need to look to expand those. They're not going to solve the problem. But we've got a ton of problems in this country. Look at the family. The family has been totally eroded over the last 40 years. And when you have moms and dads who are living together in a nuclear family and they're raising their kids, working hard, teaching them what it means to be an American and what the American dream is all about, when we get back to the basics of that and we really focus on restoring our freedoms and our values in this country, that's when I think you're going to start to see things turn around in our culture so that we see a lessening of these crimes.
Well, to the question, it may be trite, but I think it's true that people commit violent crime, not weapons. And the question was, would you be in support of taking steps to ban weapons? And the answer would be no. I think we've seen throughout our history as a country, when we've taken steps to limit access to certain types of weapons, certain types of guns, that criminals still perpetrate crime, and there's no appreciable difference on violent crime. The issue is much larger than that. It's not just simply as I said earlier, the reflexive focus on the weapon itself. We as a country need to protect, preserve the Second Amendment rights, have discussions about mental health related issues, hardening soft targets, addressing law enforcement's response, because when you look at Uvalde, one of the things that we clearly see now is failed law enforcement response. So these issues are much broader than what the focus, the discussion has been in Washington. As it relates to the current legislation that's being proposed, I would be very much against it. That's being proposed because it incentivizes red flag laws at the state level. It's actually dedicating funding to the states to adopt anti-red flag legislation, and I would be against it for that reason.
Thank you all. Okay, the next question is related to the McGirt decision. With regard to the Supreme Court's McGirt ruling, we know that there are differing views on whether the ruling was correct. The question for you, however, is where do we go from here? And does Congress have a role in bringing a resolution? Congress could do what it apparently did not do more than 100 years ago, disestablish the Indian reservations, or it could work within the confines of McGirt and, as Congressman Cole has proposed, give the state the authority to negotiate a compact on criminal jurisdiction with the tribes. In your opinion, what is the best way forward? Nathan Down.
Well, I will say that the McGirt decision was incorrectly decided. It's another example where the Supreme Court messed it up. If you actually read the opinion, you'll see that in one instance, Gorsuch says that even though that it was never officially defined as a reservation, we're going to interpret it to be a reservation. And then later on he said, even though it was never defined as ending a reservation, we're going to go ahead and interpret it the opposite way. So his own decision in that majority opinion conflicts itself. But as far as how we can fix this going forward, this is not a state issue. This is an area where the states delegated their powers and authority to the federal government. So this is going to have to be resolved either through a new Supreme Court case or through the legislature, the U.S. House and Senate. I have committed to introducing legislation to work on that, to come to a resolution. But I will say this, I work for and I will represent all of the people of Oklahoma. I do not work for the tribes. It's a difference between working for them and working with them. I'd be fine working with the tribes, talking to them, and bringing them to the table as well. But we need a resolution that fits all of the people, all 4 million Oklahomans. But this is something that is going to have to be fixed at the federal level, and I have committed to making sure to address that as one of the top priorities because it's something that almost solely impacts Oklahoma right now.
Thank you.
The biggest concern that I have about McGirt right now is about law enforcement. You can't go hardly a week in Tulsa without seeing articles about crimes that have not been appropriately prosecuted, where there's jurisdictional question and confusion over whose responsibility is to do what and to do when, and whether a sheriff can return fire or not without facing retribution from the federal government. And so there's a lot of questions that have really made it difficult for law enforcement in particular to know what they're allowed to do and when. And that's the key issue that needs to be addressed. There's still litigation that's pending that would determine whether McGirt would apply to other areas of law on the regulatory or the tax side. Provided that it is just an issue related to law enforcement, then we've got to make sure that all 4 million Oklahomans are treated exactly the same, and that's across the board.
Thank you. Scott Pruitt.
So from 1907 until the McGirt decision, the state of Oklahoma had absolute authority to police and prosecute all crime within its borders. The Nederland legislation of 1907 provided very clear boundaries. There was no disagreement at statehood with respect to the boundaries of the state of Oklahoma between the tribal nations, the state of Oklahoma, and the U.S. government. McGirt changed all that. And when you establish new borders, new reservation boundaries, that creates questions about jurisdiction. And it's not just criminal jurisdiction. It's not just crime that's committed by or against Native Americans. This affects civil matters. It affects taxing authority. It affects regulatory authority. And let me say to you very unequivocally, Congress is the only answer to fixing this problem. Justice Gorsuch said that in his opinion. Congress has absolute authority to disestablish the reservations. It can provide concurrent jurisdiction with respect to criminal matters. And we cannot be dependent upon the U.S. government, U.S. attorneys in the state of Oklahoma prosecuting crimes against our citizens. That has to change. Look, this is a clear difference between some of us on the panel. I believe McGirt is something that has to be addressed by Congress, and we should lead. And the only thing standing in the way is a unified delegation in the state of Oklahoma. If you have 5 House members, 2 U.S. senators, and the Senate and House go Republican this fall, those 7 members can fix this problem for the state of Oklahoma, because other states won't be as concerned about it as we will.
It doesn't matter to me what the challenges are in Oklahoma. The last thing I want is Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer deciding what's best for Oklahoma. Any solution related to McGirt must start with the Oklahoma First solution, and that includes all 4 million Oklahomans, and that includes those of us who are tribal members for sure. I certainly agree with my colleague, Mark Wayne Mullen, who's not here today, when he's introduced legislation promoting tribal sovereignty. He said very clearly that the tribes in the state have to work together. So as your next United States Senator, you have my commitment. I'm willing to offer any legislation that the state, working with the tribes, puts forward to address the issues that have arisen by McGirt. But it has to be an Oklahoma first solution. It should not start in Washington, D.C. If we need Congress to codify what we've decided in Oklahoma, I'm all for it. But it should start first with the state and the tribal leaders working together. And right now, as far as I know, they're not even talking, and that is not acceptable.
Thank you all. All right, the next question has to do with Ukraine. Last month, Senators Inhofe and Lankford joined a majority in the Senate in approving $40 billion in funding for military and humanitarian assistance for Ukraine. That funding is intended to support Ukraine through September. In your mind, is there a limit on how much we should spend to help Ukraine defeat Russia? Would that money be better spent here at home, perhaps on better securing schools or on mental health services? In other words, how high are the stakes? Can we afford not to support Ukraine? We begin with Luke Holland.
The number one responsibility of the federal government is to protect our country from our foreign adversaries. And that includes having the strongest military in the world. Right now, we have 2 huge enemies in this world. China is our number 1 enemy, and Russia is our number 2 enemy. The worst thing that could happen to the United States right now as it relates to Russia is that they're able to steamroll across Ukraine and then invade either Poland or Romania. We know that Russia is expansionist. They always have been. And so the provision of weapons to the Ukrainians so that they can defend themselves against Putin and his invasion is absolutely within our interest. I do not support the funding of Ukraine's government, and to the extent that funding was provided, it should have been done with a lot more strings attached. But when it comes to the provision of actual weapons, as long as the Ukrainians are willing to continue to fight for their freedoms, then we should be there to support them in that so that we can protect our NATO allies from the threat of invasion from Russia.
Thank you. Scott Pruitt.
So the problem with this issue in Washington, D.C. is many decisions are made based upon optics. The $42 billion that was allocated to Ukraine at the time that it was allocated was too little, too late. And it was all about the White House looking like they were taking steps to protect the Ukrainians. They should have been much more aggressive at the outset, sending messages to Russia that if an invasion occurred, there would be a stiff resistance to that invasion. But make no doubt about it, China is looking at our response to Ukraine. Taiwan is within the eyesight of China over the next 5 years. Our response as a nation to these types of threat is essential. I would not have supported the $42 billion. There should have been focus on offsetting those expenditures by offsets in the budget elsewhere. But in no way should we become isolationists in our view. We must, as a country, maintain our hegemonic presence in the world to ensure freedom and to send messages to China and others that if invasions occur, if aggression occurs, America will stand with our allies in Europe to make sure that there's a stiff response.
Thank you. T.W. Shannon.
When Donald Trump was president of the United States, Putin did not invade another country, and that happened for a reason. It's because America was projecting strength. I certainly believe in the America First policy agenda, and that starts with recognizing that the United States of America just sent $40 billion to the Ukrainian government to secure their border and to arm their citizens. And what are we talking about today? We're talking about an open border at our southern border, and we're talking about disarming Americans. That is not America first, that is America last. And the truth is, that was a Joe Biden-led policy, and we had Republicans in Congress siding with Joe Biden to arm the Ukrainian citizens and to secure their border. The truth is, an open heart for the Ukrainian people is not the same thing as an open checkbook. I would not have supported the $40 billion to fund Ukraine. I think it was a colossal mistake because the President of the United States has failed to tell us what our mission is there and what our real interest is there. And without a real plan, without a real solution of how we come to success in Ukraine, that was a major mistake, and under no circumstances would I have supported that legislation.
Thank you. Nathan Dom.
I said from the very beginning when they first announced the plan that I would have been opposed to it. And so I have stayed by that consistently. If you look at it, as Senator Rand Paul said, we are borrowing $40 billion from China in order to send it over to a corrupt government in the Ukraine. This is unconscionable, it's unconstitutional that we are putting our future generations so much in debt. It's immoral. We should not be borrowing money on future generations to send over there. I lived over there. I grew up over in Romania, in Eastern Europe. I can tell you the governments throughout Eastern Europe are fully corrupt. That money is not going to get to the people of the Ukraine. This was just an attempt to buy votes here in the United States by saying we have to do something, so we're going to borrow ourselves more into oblivion. And I will mention this. He said that our 2 U.S. senators voted for it. So did Congressman Mark Wayne Mullen, who has refused to come to any of the debates, so he doesn't have to stand up and answer questions for his vote that was not putting America or the people of Oklahoma first. It was putting future generations further in debt. I would have voted no, and I will continue to proclaim and stand for fiscal conservative responsibilities.
Thank you very much. Next question relates to immigration. The crisis now at our southern border will be a significant political issue in the upcoming midterm elections, just as the previous administration's border policies were politicized for the 2018 midterms. As much as this is a law and order issue, it's also very much a workforce issue. Businesses need thousands more workers, and immigrants could be part of the solution, as they have been throughout our history. So, how can we depoliticize this issue and get back to talking about the benefits of immigration, especially when it comes to meeting the needs of businesses? Scott Pruitt.
So the failures we see at the border are attributable to one thing: Congress not doing its job. And there needs to be meaningful discussion and debate about solving immigration issues. Number one should be rule of law and enforcing the law with respect to our borders and making sure that law enforcement is properly equipped to do that. But beyond that, Congress needs to take up this issue to provide answers and certainty to those across the country. I'm for legal immigration. This country is about inviting citizens, inviting people from across the globe to come here and make a life. And if we do that legally, that's the focus, and well should be the focus. But what we've seen on the southern border is an incursion. 2.5 million people coming across the border, violating rule of law, sending a message to the rest of the country that it doesn't matter. That has to change. We have to properly equip our law enforcement to maintain the border, but also take steps in Congress to provide certainty and answers to this on a go-forward basis.
Thank you. T.W. Shannon.
Alice, with all due respect, I disagree with the premise of the question. I don't believe that this is a workforce question at all. This is a matter of national security. 2.5 million people poured across our border illegally, and we have no idea who they are or where they are. That is a matter of national security, and it is the left who would tell you that that is an issue of race or somehow that's an issue in immigration. It's not. We immigrate over 1 million people legally to this country every single year, and that's a good thing. They wait in line, sometimes decades, saving their life savings to get here. We all know people who came here legally, and they add to our culture, they add to our workforce. That's a good thing. But what's happening at the southern border is a dereliction of duty, and what we need to do to end that, we need to end birthright citizenship for people who come here illegally. That was always intended for citizens, not for illegals. And we certainly need to end the other welfare benefits that entice people to come to our country illegally. That's not an evil issue. That's not an issue of immigration. That's not an issue of workforce. That is an issue of national security, and we need to secure our border immediately.
Thank you. Nathan Dowd.
I previously answered the question about workforce and immigration changes overall. I do believe we need to have a new immigration policy, and so I obviously believe that we need to secure our border and stop the illegal immigration. And I know people on the left don't like the term illegal immigrants, but what these people are is law-breaking foreigners. That's what they are. They are breaking our laws. They are criminals coming here illegally. I'm opposed to any sort of amnesty and would never vote for or support amnesty for those that have broken our laws. So we have to address the illegal immigration side of things. I fully agree that we should end birthright citizenship. If you read the 14th Amendment, that's never what it was about. That's why numerous times I have introduced legislation here at the state level that would prohibit birthright citizenship from being granted to those those that are not citizens of the United States. That's one thing that could be done here at the state level, but we need to address this federally as well. So I have already been working to address these issues. I'm going to continue to address these issues. I personally went and visited the border this last summer. I talked with county sheriffs from across the country, even as far away as Idaho, that realize that every state is a border state because these people are not stopping in the border states, they are traveling across the country. I visited with Angel families who lost loved ones because of the crimes of illegal immigrants. We must secure our border, we must build the wall, we must put a hard stop on this illegal immigration policy, this invasion, and we have to have a full reformation of our current immigration policy from the federal level.
Thank you. Luke Holland.
So I'm a limited government guy. I think the federal government should just be focused on a couple of key things. Like I mentioned earlier, we have to have the strongest military in the world so that we can defend ourselves against the real threats that we face out there. Border security, though, is a close number 2. Because right now, it's as if the left and the Democrats and Joe Biden don't even care that there's millions of people coming across the border every year illegally. We don't know who these people are. They're bringing guns. They're bringing drugs. You see the epidemic we're facing in this country with fentanyl overdoses, and a lot of that is happening because of the loose border policies of this administration, and they're just inviting everybody over. To depoliticize it, we need to start having a real conversation about the fact that it's actually really important that we know who comes into this country. A wall would work really well. We need to reinstate a lot of the other Trump policies that worked, like Remain in Mexico, and we need to defund the sanctuary cities because it is a national security priority and an imperative that we ensure that we know exactly who's coming to this country. And we want to make sure that the people who are coming here love America, that they want to work hard, and they're going to do that. We need to make sure that they stay out.
Okay, next question has to do with energy. Responding to a Federal Reserve survey conducted in March, 60% of oil and gas executives cite, quote, investor pressure to maintain capital discipline as the main reason they weren't drilling more. Only about 10% said it had to do with environmental, social, or government issues. To the extent that those drilling decisions are influenced by Washington, what policies or policy changes would you support to increase domestic energy production? T.W. Shannon.
Yeah, there's no question that capital is a coward. Capital will not flow to a hostile work environment. And so while we've got, double speak out of Washington, D.C. talk, the president saying out of one side of his mouth, we need more drilling. But on the other end, he's got an out-of-control EPA and other agencies who are making it more difficult for permitting altogether. That is an absolute travesty of justice because the truth is we should be incentivizing investment. Again, when we unleash the power of the private sector, that's when we see good things happen in America. But unfortunately, the radical left, they've made profit an evil thing. They've made it a crime for people to make profit in this country. Capitalism is what's made this country great. The idea that people can start making an investment, they can grow that investment, they can create jobs. That's what you all do every single day in your life, and that's what's helped to distinguish Oklahoma from the rest of the world. And so we should include in our discussion when we talk about making America more energy independent, we should not just be independent, we should be energy dominant like we were under the Trump administration when we were producing more energy than we were using and we were an exporter. And in that way, we don't have to go to our foreign adversaries begging them for more oil and going to the oil cartels and asking them for more oil. We can fix our problem. We can do it right here in Oklahoma.
Thank you. Nathan Dow?
So the Biden regime will claim that they've been releasing permits and that there should not be an issue with oil and with drilling and because they've released these permits. But when you talk to real people in the oil and gas industry, especially here in Oklahoma, they go directly to your question about capital. By the time that those permits are finally released, the capital may no longer be there or it may no longer be cost effective to move forward with that because of the duration and the time it takes to get those permits, even when they are finally approved. So what I have proposed is a real solution to this, that we have an Emergency Energy Renewal Act in the United States and we expedite the permitting and the licensing process. We deregulate and we get the government out of these affairs, especially here in Oklahoma. I've said this time and time again. It's not like we're drilling off the coast. It's not like we're drilling in marshlands. We know how to drill safely and effectively here in Oklahoma. We almost single-handedly could solve the issues that we're facing across the nation. If our oil and gas industry here in Oklahoma was able to get the deregulation, get the feds out of our affairs, we could solve this problem quickly. So I've said I will introduce legislation to expedite that process and hopefully be able to make that permanent in the future, to not let that permitting process slow us down.
Thank you.
You know, it's unbelievable to me that the left has just totally demonized the oil and gas industry, and that you have Democrat senators celebrating the fact that oil and gas prices are so high because of how it forces people to buy electric vehicles instead, electric vehicles that they can't afford, and that we're subsidizing to people who make over $100,000 a year. And so the first thing that we need to do is to stop demonizing many of you guys who are in this industry. We have tremendous resources in this country. I would much rather China be worried that we're going to cut off their natural gas because we're making so much of it here in the United States than Germany is worried that Russia is going to cut theirs off. But that's the situation that we're in right now. We need to recognize that the oil and gas resources that we have in this country are one of the crown jewels of our economy, and that we need to drill as much as we can, everywhere we can, and give you guys the freedom to actually pursue that so that we can use it as a national security strength moving forward.
So
Thank
we
you.
shouldn't be surprised at all about what's occurring now. Candidate Biden said that he was going to declare a war on fossil fuels in this country, and President Biden has carried that out. He's canceled production in the Gulf. He's canceled production in Alaska. He's canceled the Keystone and Line 5 out of Michigan. He's increased permitting requirements under NEPA. With President Trump, we actually cut those NEPA permitting requirements to less than 2 years. This president changed that to make it undefined. So these issues that we're confronted with as a country, high gas prices and high energy cost and energy uncertainty, is exactly what candidate Biden campaigned on. And the answers are very clear. We need more pipelines, more production, and more refineries in this country. It's very clear. And this isn't just about what we're paying at the gas pump, though that's very expensive. These issues are geopolitical. To the degree that America is not producing energy, who fills in the space? China and Russia. And Europe is dependent upon those sources as opposed to America. America, when it produces energy, makes the world a freer place. And so we need shackles off energy. We can do it in a way that is environmentally sensitive and safe. We did it in the Trump administration. Again, all it takes is leadership.
Thank you. All right, we have time for one more question before we get to closing statements. And this last question has to do with general governance. This contest, in some ways, this contest between you, in some ways, seems to be about who can show they are more conservative. But as we have seen during this recent Congress, legislation from either the extreme right or extreme left doesn't really stand a chance of going anywhere. Senator Inhofe has prided himself on being one of the most conservative members during his tenure, but is also famously working with the very liberal Barbara Boxer on public works legislation, working with Senator Reid on defense authorization bills, even boasting of friendships with members the likes of Bernie Sanders. The question for you is, do you believe in compromise? And please give some examples of how you've been able to work in a bipartisan way in your careers. Nathan Dahm.
I am the most conservative candidate in this race. That is proven. I have the most proven record. If you look at it, I am the most proven conservative in the state history for the state Senate. So I am running on that proven conservative record, and I believe that the true responsibility of government is to protect individual rights. That's what our country was founded on in the Declaration. That's what the Constitution is about. The Bill of Rights is about protecting individual rights. So that's what I focused on. Now, there will be some people that say if you're too conservative, you can't get anything done. Well, since I've been in the state Senate, I've passed over 100 pieces of legislation. Now, I've also repealed over 200 laws and regulations because I am for limited government. So I've been able to do both. And what I've always said is I am more than willing to work with anyone that wants to work on protecting our rights. Whether they're Republican, Democrat, Independent, or anything else, I am more than willing to work with them. But I will absolutely work against anyone, whether they are a Republican, a Democrat, or anything else, if they want to take your rights, because my job as an elected official is to defend and protect your constitutionally protected rights. So that's what I'm going to serve and continue to do.
Thank you.
So there's two kinds of senators that Jim always talks about. There's workhorses and there's show horses. And I'm going to be a workhorse senator. I love the fact that many of you in the room have been able to call me with challenges that you're facing, with legislation that's pending before Congress, and we've been able to work to get it done. And one of the things that I talk about on the trail is, and the reason I'm running is because I want to restore the foundation of America, which is our freedom and our Christian values. And when I talk about Christian values, one of the things that I mean about that is loving our neighbors. And so that means having really great relationships with people of all ideological backgrounds and perspectives, and being able to find those areas of common ground where we can work together. Jim's endorsed me for this race because he knows that I can strike that right balance of having the spine to block the bad things that the left wants to do, but also to figure out how we can move the ball forward for Oklahoma and advance real conservative victories that we need.
Thank you. Scott Pruitt?
So I believe you can be a conservative and have strong convictions, but not make it personal. I actually dealt with some of those contentious issues that you can never imagine at the EPA, but did so and didn't make it personal. In fact, Ben Cardin, on the day of my confirmation, the senator from Maryland, he and I don't agree on much, called me on the day of my confirmation and said, Scott, I want to tell you something. I love how you conducted yourself. You conducted yourself with professionalism. You answered all the questions. You're very courteous through the process, and thank you. I'm not going to vote for you, but I want you to know that I really appreciate how you handled yourself. We need more of that type of outreach in order to get things done at the U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate isn't the U.S. House. I've looked at the U.S. Senate as a place where adults go to think about the long view of the republic and not to be driven by the populism of the day. Leadership matters. We need to have dialogue on the floor of the Senate. I believe power of persuasion, use conservative ideas to solve problems, and I will tell you, we need more lawmakers, legislators in the U.S. out making speeches and engaged in rhetoric, but engaged in true legislating, because when legislation doesn't happen, the executive branch through regulation, and the fourth branch are going to take leadership in Congress, strong leadership to focus on real solutions for the American people and show the kind of courage to address them.
Thank you. T.W. Shannon?
We need statesmen in the United States Senate, and I will tell you, I'm a big fan of the two-party system. I believe it's helped to what make this country great, and I fundamentally believe that just because you disagree with me, that does not make you evil. Now, to be clear, it makes you wrong, but it does not make you evil. And I have a record, having served as the Speaker of the House here in Oklahoma. I had the chance to work across the aisle to get a lot of things done for the state, including passing tax cuts, including welfare reform, including workers' compensation reform. And I did it because I met with a guy by the name of Scott Inman. Once a week, we had breakfast and lunch. And what we found out during those meetings, I told him very straight up at the very beginning, listen, Scott, I've got 72 members. You only have 20-something. I'm going to win most of our fights. In fact, I'm going to win every one of those fights. But the truth is, all I ask of you is no surprises. And we had that mutual agreement. And what we found out is that we actually in Oklahoma City grew up in a very similar neighborhood. We were similarly educated, and our kids were very close in the same age. And so while we certainly had our disagreements philosophically, we were able to work together and to get things done and to have a very cohesive friendship and working relationship. And that's just one example, I think, of how the two-party system has gotten a bad rap. Just because you disagree with me, that doesn't make you evil. That means that you have an opportunity for us to find the things that we agree on. That requires leadership, that requires statesmanship, and it's something that I've done my entire career.
Responses to that. All right, so now we're really just coming to closing states right now. Again, you have 2 minutes for these, and we will start moving down the line with Luke Holland.
Well, I couldn't be prouder of the work that I was able to do as Jim's chief of staff the last 5 years. Especially during working with the Trump administration. We were able to get more done for the conservative movement and actually get things done than anyone thought possible. We cut taxes to historic levels and had a booming economy that was the consequence of that, and deregulation. We were able to rebuild the military. A lot of people don't realize it, but during the last 5 years of the Obama administration, he actually cut defense spending by 25%, which left us in a massive readiness crisis. We also got 3 conservatives confirmed to the Supreme Court who over and over and over again are delivering victories for the conservative movement, including here in the coming days, the overturn of Roe versus Wade. And these are things that have not been able to be undone by the Biden administration. But what he is doing and what the socialist left is doing is totally anti-business. It's totally against everything that we love here in Oklahoma. The issues at the border are out of control, and it's as if he doesn't even care. Inflation is another completely self-inflicted because of all the spending that's going on. And then you have the rampant issues going on around the world that's a result of the weakness that he has shown on the international stage. Jim has endorsed me for this race because he knows that I have the spine to stand up to the left and actually have a principled focus on how we can deliver conservative results for Oklahoma. But he also knows my heart. He knows that more than anything else, I understand that this job is about serving you. It's about serving Oklahoma and delivering results for you guys here in the state. It's not about me, it's about you guys. And so I would really appreciate your support on June 28th. I'm Luke Holland. I approve this message, and I really appreciate you guys having me today, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Scott Pruitt.
So we've addressed many issues here today, and there are many others we could have talked about, but issues change. What really matters in any given race, in my view, is what is your motive in running? Because if your motive in running is to get a position, once you get the position, you do all that you can to keep it. And we have that kind of leadership that's dominant in Washington, D.C. Individuals that have gone to the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate that are elected to those bodies, and then they do all that they can to keep that by engaged in populism as opposed to leadership. Our institutions are not deficient in this country. They truly are not. They're sublime. They're providential. It's the people within the institutions that are failing to do their job. As the head of the EPA, I took on some of the most difficult issues our country faced. In less than 18 months, we became energy independent. We de-weaponized the agency against the energy sector, against farmers and ranchers, against manufacturers. We took tremendous steps to save billions of dollars to the U.S. economy, and our economy was booming. And now here we are 4 years later, and the exact opposite is true. We have answers in this country to most of our challenges, but we lack the leadership. I desire to serve you in Washington, D.C. and the U.S. Senate because I believe I've exhibited that, both as Attorney General when I was in the state of Oklahoma, but also as EPA Administrator for President Trump. And I commit to you this: if you send me to Washington, D.C., I will work to solve problems not only for Oklahoma, but for this country, with a sincere heart, lawmaking, legislating to find solutions, and doing so in civility. I ask for your support on June 28th. I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you very much. T.W. Shannon.
This state and this country have been very good to me. This past Sunday, I had a chance, like many of you, to go home to Lawton and worship with my dad back at Bethlehem Baptist Church. And this is a church where my dad was the deacon and my grandfather was the deacon. And when you grow up in a predominantly African-American Baptist church and your dad's the deacon and your grandfather's the deacon, someone every Sunday tells you you're going to be a preacher one day. And that used to bother me as a kid because I knew God didn't call me to be a preacher. What he did call me to be was someone who was going to make a difference in this world. And because of the goodness of God and the greatness of this state, I had a chance by the time I was 26 years old to finish law school, to work for 2 members of Congress. I was elected to the Oklahoma legislature when I was 26. And when I was 33, my colleagues chose me to be the Speaker of the House. And today, I've gotten to serve as the CEO of a bank. That story only happens in the United States of America. It can't happen anywhere else. And unfortunately, the narrative in Washington, D.C. is that story isn't supposed to happen. It can't happen if you look like me. But the truth is, America is not the home of systemic racism. America is the home of systemic opportunity. And if you ever doubt that, just think back to a few images that we've seen recently where we saw in Afghanistan people literally hanging on to the wings of airplanes to try to come to this country. We saw a mother literally handing her newborn child to a man she didn't know, who didn't speak her language. The only thing she knew about that young man was that he had the old red, white, and blue on his shoulder. And that was enough for her to know if her child could just get to this place that we call home and the rest of the world calls America, that child could have the most amazing life. Friends, I'm running for the United States Senate because I fundamentally believe America is the world's last best hope. And I would ask for your vote on June 28th.
Thank you, T.W. Shannon. Nathan Dahm.
Thank you all for being here. You know, it's an honor to stand up here and actually answer questions. This gives you all an opportunity to compare and contrast the candidates because there are substantial differences. I know you might not think that from hearing a lot of the answers that were very similar on this stage today, but there are substantial differences. And the main difference is action versus words. We've all heard the phrase that actions speak louder than words. It's easy to be a campaign conservative. That's why everybody in Oklahoma does it, because they know that Oklahomans are conservative. Oklahomans deserve a conservative U.S. Senator to represent them. But it's easy to say things on the campaign trail. It's easy to make promises to be a fiscal conservative and then to go and vote for continuing resolutions that are unconstitutional. It's easy to say you're for term limits and then, like Congressman Mullen, to break your word when it becomes politically expedient for you. And I wish he was here today to answer for that, but he chooses not to be here. It's easy to say that you're going to do certain things. It's much more difficult to actually do it. I'm the only candidate on this stage that has advanced your constitutional rights. I'm the only candidate on this stage that has protected life, that has actually saved the lives of the unborn through legislation that we got passed this year that Governor Stitt signed. I'm the only candidate on this stage that understands that the role of government is about protecting your rights. I admit and acknowledge we're not going to agree on everything, and that's okay. There's some of you here today that probably want a liberal Republican. That's not me, okay? If you want a liberal Republican, you have plenty of other options to choose from. I am a proven conservative because I have that record, because of what I have accomplished, and I'm going to continue to do that. And you can know that I'm always going to be honest with you, even if we disagree. I will tell you exactly where I stand on the issues and why. I'm not going to tell you just something that you want to hear. I'm not going to say something in your ear and then vote differently. It's easy to go before friendly media and give talking points. It's easy to just give campaign rhetoric. I have not done that. I've proven that I'm going to run as a true proven conservative. And my name is Nathan Dahm. I'd be honored to be the conservative U.S. Senator for the state of Oklahoma. Thank you all.
Thank you. And now let's show our appreciation to all of the candidates. Before you hustle off, just want to again thank them all for being here, for giving such thoughtful answers. Also, we want to thank Hillcrest Healthcare System for generously contributing to the 2022 senatorial primary debate. Oklahoma's primary election is next Tuesday, June 28th, so please be sure to vote. Thank you so much. My name is Alex Cameron. Have a great day.
To wrap up today's program, please welcome